Hey guys, Zom Fox here, and today we're going to be talking about each team's best player they have re-signed heading into the 2025 UFL season. Now look, we've seen a lot of players that have just joined spring football, whether they be true free agents or guys from some of the college drafts and all that. But the most important players are, of course, the ones that re-signed to the teams. Well, I've seen some big trades, especially the one that happened literally yesterday with Jalen McClendon getting traded to Houston. There's a lot to talk about, but we're going to look at the best re-signs. Of course, we are talking about a player re-signing to their team from last year, of course, as we have guys in the thumbnail like Justin Hall going back to the Houston Roughnecks, to put it lightly, or simply. Now, again, some of these teams have had really only a couple huge re-signs. A couple of them have had a lot of them. So some of these teams are really easy to pick, and I did kind of cheat on one of them, but you'll understand why when we get to it. So, without further ado, let's get started with the guys in the thumbnail, starting with the Houston Roughnecks and Justin Hall. This is pretty obvious. I mean, if we're being honest, is there really anybody else in the roster that would be a bigger deal for them to re-sign than him? Look, I made a case that Justin Hall was the best receiver in the league last year, and most people actually agreed, even Battlehawks fans. And the reason is pretty simple. He did what he did with pretty poor quarterback play. He got basically a couple games of Nolan Henderson, who is a project QB that could be really good. But overall, with guys like Sinet and Garantano throwing him the football, the fact that he was able to hit 600 yards, be third in overall receiving yards, first in receptions or tied, be first in yak by a huge margin. I mean, come on. It's pretty obvious Justin Hall is the best receiver to re-sign to the Roughnecks and probably the best receiver in the league. And I know a lot of people would say guys like Hakeem Butler or, there's arguments for Sims, Davis, and all that. I think that overall, when you look at what he did last year with who he had around him, Justin Hall was the best receiver in the league last year, so him coming back to Houston is a big deal. Now, yes, there's of course the huge concern over the fact that Curtis Johnson, again, barring a super surprise, is going to be the head coach of the team next year. So, the question is, are we going to see more of a 2023 Gamblers or a 24 Roughnecks? The 23 Gamblers looked like CJ was a decent coach. 24, not at all. So, there's a lot of question marks there, but I think overall, though, with their new QBs that they're getting, right, or they're bringing back Henderson, they signed another one, and they traded for McClendon, I think that Justin Hall should be able to have a better season than last year, but we'll see what ends up happening. But for the Roughnecks, their biggest re-sign so far is obviously Justin Hall. Now, the Battlehawks, I'm going to go with Jacob Sailors. This is a tough one. They have a former DPOY that re-signed with them, a former Special Teams Player of the Year, or last year Special Teams Player of the Year re-signed, and a couple other guys, but I'm going to go with Sailors. Look, Sailors was the best running back in the league last year by a pretty wide margin. He finished first in rushing yards among running backs, as only Adrian Martinez had more than him. And you have to add in the fact that he had 150 receiving yards as well. So he did crack 600 yards from scrimmage. He had 8 total touchdowns, which, when you think about it, is pretty damn remarkable. 5 of them rushing was actually tied for second best in the entire league. And then adding to the 3, I mean, it's pretty clear he deserves to be up here. He was 12th in yards after catch, which is also impressive considering he's a running back, which shows that just how much he was able to, help that offense, which really underperformed a lot last year. He was really the only guy that at no point did you say was really failing the team. He was really the most consistent player on that offense, just because when you look at the overall season, what he produced. I mean, this was a position, the running backs for the Battlehawks, that heading into the season, there's a lot of question marks around, and Sailors was able to put that all away. He was an all UFL running back, the only one, in fact, as they only had one, and he got that spot and nobody really was upset about it. I know there were some arguments to other guys, but when you look at it overall, Sailors was insane. I mean, his 4.9 yards per rush was also crazy. It was second best among running backs. So, I mean, it's pretty obvious he has to be here for the Battlehawks. Again, I think that there's a lot of other players that were really good that have returned so far, but overall, Sailors is going to be the most important for them having success this upcoming season. That's why I put him as the Battlehawks. Now we're going to look at the DC Defenders. We're going to go with Abram Smith. Now this is more of a wild card one because there's the massive question mark of will he return to form. For those of you who don't know, Abram Smith basically tore his ACL in training camp last year and never played it down in the UFL. But before that, in the XFL, he wasn't just the best running back in the league. He was the best running back in the league by 2 country miles. I mean, we're talking over 300 more yards than second place back in 2023, right? Patrick had 443 for the Brahmas, which was second best. Smith had 788. And even if you consider, but he had more attempts, he averaged over 5 yards a carry, which is crazy. His 7 touchdowns were also tied for first in the league. He was second in yards per rush among 50 attempts. I mean, it's pretty clear that he was the guy, and the question was him and Mark Thompson basically in 2023 who was better, but we never got to see what he could do in 2024 because of the injury. So yes, there is a huge question mark of will he return to form, because of course an ACL injury is still a big deal. Even if we've seen a lot of these players make comebacks, it still is a big one to come back from. But I'm going with him because I think that we all realize that Jordan Ta'amu had a lot less to do with that Defenders team having success in 2023 than we thought. Looking back, it's pretty clear that guys like Lucky Jackson and Abram Smith really made that Defenders team what it was. And Ta'amu was kind of like a system QB. The reason we all say that now is because when you look historically at what he's done, he's always had to have a good team around him. He isn't somebody that can just make a team good. And so Abram Smith returning, I think, is a huge deal. Because if he even comes back to being like 2/3 of what he was, I mean, 2/3 of what he was would still be a top 5 running back in the league. So we need to see what he can do here in the UFL. And because of that, I'm going to go with Abram Smith for the biggest re-sign for the Defenders so far. Now, I will say, though, I don't think there was any official UFL communication for him. I don't know what went on there, but the Defenders posted about it, so he counts. Now, as for the Michigan Panthers, we're going to go with Kai Nakua. Now, the Panthers, of course, have a lot of big hitters on defense that haven't returned yet. And Kai Nakua is third on that list of the big hitters on defense, and he's the biggest one that's re-signed. Now, look, Kai Nakua was looking to be the DPOY during the season last year, but then Breland Speaks just went off the last 3 weeks of the season, especially that Houston game, and kind of stole the award from him to most people. But Kai Nakua still is an incredible player, right? Now, of course, is he Frank Gidna or Speaks? No. But he is the next best thing, and when you're talking about Speaks and Gidna, I mean, being worse than them really isn't a big deal. You know, you're talking about two of, if not the two best defensive players in the league. Now, when you look at Kai Nakua, right, last year he had 3 interceptions, he had a sack, 2 TFLs, 43 tackles, and 34 solo tackles, which is remarkable. That was tied 8th in the league, and he was tied first in interceptions. Again, a lot of this was during that first half of the season. That's why, you know, Speaks is able to kind of take it back. But when you look at him, I'm going to go with him because, yes, I know a lot of people are really excited about Bryce Perkins, him returning to Michigan and seeing what he's going to do next year. I can't put a guy that basically played like 2 halves and like a drive and say that's the most important re-sign so far. So I'm not going to put Perkins. I'm not putting EJ Perry. I think that so far Kai Nakua is the biggest player that they have re-signed. He was an all UFL safety. He was a huge, huge player to bring back for Michigan. He's going to be a huge factor on that defense. And I think that he is the best player that we have re-signed so far. Again, if we end up bringing back Speaks or Gidna, of course, those two would be higher than him. But there's really nobody on the team aside from maybe Marcus Sims on offense or Hills. But, I mean, Nakua was great last year. He is the best player the Michigan Panthers have re-signed so far. Now, as for the Renegades, this was really the toughest one. The Renegades have kind of had a questionable offseason. They kind of signed players late, considering the fact they didn't even have a coaching issue like a lot of the other teams did. But so far, I'm going to go with Donald Payne. Now, you could argue even Marquette King, you know, you could argue a couple other guys. I think that Payne overall is the best one. He was a very underappreciated linebacker last year, one of those guys. He finished 4th in tackles, and he had, you know, tied first in forced fumbles. That tied for 14th in tackles is supposed to be solo tackles. But when you look at him, the fact is Payne was a very solid linebacker for the team last year. 3 TFLs, 2 sacks. He was one of those guys that could, you know, pass rush, get to the QB kind of thing. I think that overall, he was a very underappreciated player. He's one of the very, very few players in the defense that actually did something. And with the recent news that Amari St. Amour retired, which I believe that was like a week or 2 ago, this is even more important that he got brought back because Amari St. Amour provided a huge boost to that defense. And with him gone, it means that, once again, more weight is going to be put on the shoulders of Payne. Payne has been a very solid linebacker in spring football over the past few years, and he's going to have to continue doing that. That is why I think that so far he is the best re-sign the Renegades have had. Now, as for the Memphis Showboats, this is Dawood Davis easily. Dawood Davis was an all-UFL receiver last year. I say debatably because, again, Justin Hall got robbed of that spot. You can argue if it was Sims or Davis that robbed him. Davis, though, was still incredible. And again, it's like Justin Hall, the QB argument, except this time it's more so the O-line argument, right? Yes, Cookus and T-Will were massive underperformers from what we expected of them. How much of that was on them? How much of that was on the O-line? A lot of it was on the O-line. The point is Davis was still incredible, right? 8th in receiving yards, 5th in yards after catch, tied for 2nd in receiving TDs at 5, and 6th in receptions. He was an incredible wide receiver, and he had many super highlight plays. Of course, he had that 82-yarder. So, I mean, it's pretty tough to argue anyone else above him. I mean, even if you just look at their roster in terms of who they could bring back, there's really nobody bigger at the moment. Again, a lot of the QB questions are now, questions at the QB position. They have a new head coach. And this was like, if I remember correctly, this was the first official signing the Showboats made after the new GM and head coach came into the team. So the fact that Wisenhunt got him here, or whatever you want to view that, was it a coincidence? Maybe. But it still did happen. It still is something to know. So I think that overall, though, Davis is going to be a huge player on this team's offense next year, just like he was this past year. And if the team gets a somewhat better O-line, I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up competing for the receiving yards crown next year. But we'll see. And then the second to last one is the Brahmas with John Trey Kirkland. This is one of the toughest ones because I know some would argue destroying purely for the eye appeal, the people going to look at the Brahmas. But really it was Devontae Beckett or Kirkland. And I went with Kirkland. The reason is I feel like the Brahmas, their defense, it has Wade Phillips coaching it. It's going to be a good unit. He's going to make players great. Kirkland, however, is going to be huge for making the QB situation better, right? They are going with Kellen Mond more than likely as the team's QB of the future of 2025. And Kirkland was an incredible receiver last year. His 614 receiving yards were second best in the league. He was tied first in receptions overall, 6th in yak, tied for 8th in receiving TDs at 3, and he was up there in the top 20 for yards per catch. So again, very solid player, really great player, one of the best receivers in the league. Again, one of those guys who was among that top 7 discussion because really there was a lot of guys last year that were really good at the receiver position, but I think that overall he's the biggest re-sign. Look, we all expected Cody Latimer to be that number 1 receiver for the Brahmas in a lot of ways, especially when Dormady ended up getting so much playing time. But Kirkland ended up being the number 1 receiver on the team. So I think that does say a lot about how good he was. And I understand that running back position, really helped him out, especially at the end of the year. But I think that Kirkland is going to be a huge importance, especially with Cody Latimer retiring, which we all kind of expected it to. He said that this past year was his last year, and he meant it. But without him, that means that he's going to have even more weight on his shoulders, just like Payne with Henri St. Amour retiring. So Kirkland's going to have to step up. So I think he is the biggest re-sign. And for the one I cheated on, the Stallions, I'm going with the running back duo of CJ Marable and Ricky Person Jr. I don't think anyone should be too shocked at this. I mean, both these guys, both in the regular season and postseason, had very similar stat lines. Both these guys had just over 100 yards receiving, if I'm not mistaken, as well. They're very similar. They are a 1-2 punch at the running back position. CJ Marable is one of the spring football GOATs in the modern era. He has been a part of all 3 Stallions championship teams. In person, of course, last year had a couple of games which are insane and overall finished with the most TDs in the league, right? Ricky Person finished with the first in TDs in the league, 7th in rush yards, and 14th in yards per rush among running backs who had at least 20 attempts. Marable was 9th on that stat, but he was tied 6th in TDs and 8th in rushing yards, literally 2 behind him. And again, their postseason numbers and receiving numbers are also pretty damn similar, and both these guys have re-signed. Now, yeah, CJ Marable re-signed all the way back in August versus Ricky Person that just re-signed, literally 1 month ago to the day this video is coming out. But I'm going to go with the 2 of them because I know there's been a couple other pretty big re-signs. I know DeMarcus Gates re-signed. But I think that overall this team has really relied on the running back position a lot more than people want to say. Again, even with that Alex Magoo 2023 championship run where Magoo was just going off, CJ Marable was still a very important piece of that championship team. And the running back position has been huge for the Stallions, and this past year proved it with this 1-2 punch. And I wouldn't be shocked if they continue this 1-2 punch at the running back position, and that is why I'm putting them both here as the biggest re-sign. Because one of them is not really that much better than the other one. They're both really solid players, and they help the Stallions win, so I'm going with the 2 of them for the biggest re-sign for the Birmingham Stallions. So that'll do it. This has been Zom Fox. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. We are less than 100 subscribers away from 1,000, where we will be doing a giveaway. So make sure you're subscribed so we can enter that giveaway whenever we get close to 1,000 subscribers. The UFL season is getting closer and closer, right? I mean, it starts in March. We're just a few months away. So I will be making videos, of course, whenever anything comes out. There's a lot of rumors that the schedule might come out this month or next month. So be on the lookout for that. And as always, guys, have a great night.